Hello, everyone. I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Though the assassination 50 years ago today ended a presidency, it touched off a chain of events that would lead to a new alignment in party politics and had an impact on who governed Louisiana. A special election for an upstate congressional seat last Saturday may also have had a political impact, this time on the direction of local Republicans. We'll take a look at these stories tonight, as well as an ongoing series on political contributors, local perceptions on the quality of life, and our Future Watch segment investigates why our streets are so dark. Shedding light for us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer, Informed Sources; Manuel Torres, reporter, NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune; Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter; and Stephanie Grace, columnist, the New Orleans Advocate. First, Manuel, over to you. You and Lee Zurich over at Fox 8 News and a whole team of reporters worked for months on this extensive ongoing series about campaign finance in the state of Louisiana. When we first had you on, you talked to us about the 400 top donors, about bundling, et cetera. Why don't you tell us, fill us in about what you guys have also uncovered since then?
Well, since then we have written about some outright, what we perceive are outright violations of the law. There were 9 officials we discovered, and I'm sure there's probably more. We just discovered 9 that had accepted tens of thousands of dollars in excessive PAC contributions. There's a limit in the law of what you can take overall from PACs. We also look into the expenditures of some of these officials and discovered what many of them, and this is common among many politicians, they spend in things. The law says you can spend on anything related to campaigning or the exercise of the office. Well, in some of those cases can be renting luxury vehicles, a lot of travel, meals at very expensive restaurants. And in the case of Lario, the president of the Senate, more than $50,000 on tickets to LSU, the Hornets, etc. So it's just all kind of different ways they use the money that are within the letter of the law, but the law is just very vague.
It's very vague, and there is a joint committee, right? The Governmental Affairs Committee is looking into that.
Yeah, their report is due February 1st, and this is in response to the Ethics Board. For 3 years, the Ethics Board has been asking for guidance, for more clarity on the law. And the report is now finally coming out February 1st. It's not clear if it's going to include any actual reform proposals, but there's some hope among some advocates that it will include some changes.
So these PAC contribution excesses, tell us a little bit more about that and what can be done about that, if anything.
Well, the law says that you can take, if you are a statewide candidate, $80,000 from PACs, any PAC during an election cycle, $60,000 for legislative races and $20,000 for other races. And what these officials did is some of them exceeded that by almost twice. J.P. Morrell had a $60,000 limit. He collected more than $120,000 during the race against Cynthia Wheeler Lewis. Alario collected more than the limit in 3 different election cycles, 2007, 2011, and already he's over for 2015. Danny Martini, 2 election cycles he went over, and so on and so on. Now, the penalty is 1 time the amount of excessive contributions if you did it without knowing that you were doing it. If you were willfully and knowingly doing it, then it's twice the amount, which means if the Ethics Board finds and a judge agrees that J.P. Morrell did it knowingly, he's in the hook for $120,000 and more.
Any responses from these different elected officials regarding this too?
Yes, J.P. Morrell said that it was a clerical error and that he will return any excessive money. The Commissioner of Agriculture also said it was an error with the software that they use for filing reports, and he said he will return any excessive money. The others will not comment.
How does it get to the Ethics Board? Is there somebody on the Ethics Board who's looking for these things, or does somebody have to file a complaint?
You will think so, but the Ethics Board attorney told us that she's been there since 1997, excuse me, and they do not recall a single case where they investigated this. Even though some of the candidates had actually declared in the line on the report where they say how much you got from PACs, they had a number that exceeded their limit. That's how we at first were like, wait a minute, this is over the limit. And then we started looking more detail.
And the normal way cases get to the Ethics Commission is if somebody it's like
Correct.
filing a lawsuit, right?
Yeah, a complaint or a news report. That's usually how they do it. They rely on other people. And that's one of the criticisms that some people are making of the board. They say, well, they should be more proactive, actually auditing some of these reports. Their argument is they don't have enough personnel, and they get more than 8,000 reports on any given year. they can't really take a look at it.
So most of the violations that they've cited, though, have been for filing issues, right? Either not filing or late filing.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at any agenda of the ethics board, more than 2/3 of the agenda is just people who file late, which, and they shouldn't just abandon that. The point that some of the people who are looking for change are making is they're bogged down on this. In fact, some of them are starting to suspect the lawmakers purposely set a system that bogs down the board on this minutia so that they don't get to the real meat of the violations, like people who are taking excess money and
Right.
Well, that's kind of
misusing
the
it.
heart of it, that any change has to go through the legislature,
Correct.
and these are the people who benefit.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, we don't know if there will be. I mean, it's too early to tell. The session doesn't begin until the spring, so we'll have to see in the next months if anybody file any proposals. But we think the best chance may be this report that you alluded to, and if they propose any changes.
Let me get you to touch on Jefferson Parish politics, too.
Yeah, sure.
You took
We
a
did
look
that
at
too.
that.
Yeah, well, everybody. I mean, it has been reported extensively with specific cases, and just a lot of people thought and suspected that most of the money that goes into Jefferson Parish campaigns come from contractors, but we wanted to figure out how much and which contractors. So we did an analysis of about 7,500 contributions that were given from 2009 through 2012, the period that we were covering. And we found the top 100. And out of those top 100, 75 of those are companies, engineers, consultants, attorneys mostly, who get no bid work at the discretion of the council. Jefferson is unusual because in New Orleans and many other communities, the executive, the mayors, are the ones that do the contracting. In Jefferson, it's the legislative power that does the contracting, and most of the council members receive most of their money from these top contractors.
Bureau of Governmental Research has taken a look into this.
have.
What are the suggestions that they have, recommendations?
Initially, they proposed that the parish president be put in charge. And the council would say that's a non-starter. They're not going to surrender that political power.
Right.
What BGR is suggesting now is if you're not going to surrender the power, then the technical committees that grade these contractors, you pick the top company every time, period. Just take it out of the hands of politicians. Just put it on the hands of professionals grading. The council answers, well, those professionals are some of them appointed by the president. How can we trust that they're independent? We need to review the grading system. And they're proposing instead, Councilman Roberts is proposing to pick from the top 3 or the top 5. BGR say that's not enough. That still gives them too much discretion.
When Jefferson reorganized his government many years ago, there was a tradition of having a weak parish president. They didn't want it to be like a mayor-council sort of thing. And originally, the parish president didn't even have the veto. And I think they have that now. But yeah, there was a tradition of giving the power in the legislative and for the parish president to be more of an administrator.
And that is still the case in many ways. I mean, the parish president, as far as contracting, the directors, which are political appointees, are part of the technical committees that grade these contracts, but council members also have a representative there. So
you guys have wrapped up this series for the time being. What's the reaction been, both from the politicians and also from the public?
Well, we heard complaints from the folks we expected to hear complaints from. I mean, some of the sources, some of the people we tried to interview and denied interviews and disputed the fairness of looking at them, not others. At first, we were accused of focusing only on Republicans, even though we cover Republicans and Democrats. And we explained this is not a one-party issue. Both parties are committing these same sins, if you will. And then from readers, I mean, we had a good reaction. I mean, if you go and look at the comments on NOLA.com, a lot of them are people who say, I'm glad that you're putting some numbers on what we suspected was going on, that kind of thing.
And if there's going to be any reform, it's going to have to come from the public. Quality of life. We're going to go to Stephanie right now.
Okay.
A couple of polls. As a matter of fact, you know what I wanted to talk to you about first was the congressional race up in the 5th congressional district. We'll get to quality of life in just a couple of minutes. That race up there in the 5th congressional district came out with a victor that not everybody was expecting.
Very few people were expecting, I think. Maybe the Duck Dynasty guys were
Yes.
expecting because they were on board with Marley. But meet Congressman Vance McAllister, who went to Washington for the first time in his life and got himself sworn in as a member of Congress. So it's kind of an extraordinary story. He beat by 20 points. It was a shellacking, really. A guy named Neil Reiser, a state senator. They're both Republicans. It's this is the product of one of those open Louisiana elections where in a Republican district, 2 Republicans meet in the runoff. One of the interesting dynamics of those elections is that Democrats often become the swing vote. And it really does look like that happened in this case. McAllister is a total newcomer. One of the things he did was that he moved a little bit to the left of Reiser, who was running with a lot of support from Tea Party people and also other Republican members of Congress. He was really the establishment choice.
Yeah.
And McAllister moved to the left somewhat. On one of the issues was the Affordable Care Act, which is, of course, the issue everyone's talking about. He's not a proponent of it, but his argument is it's here, it's the law of the land, it's not likely to go away. We need to try to fix it, not just try to repeal it. And then the other difference between him and Reiser is that he endorsed the state accepting the Medicaid expansion that's optional as part of the Affordable Care Act that Bobby Jindal has made a very big point of rejecting. So that probably helped him get a lot of Democratic votes. He also, he ran on civility a little bit. That was interesting too, because there was some real negative campaigning coming from Reiser, and he, it was almost a guy who was saying, I'm different. I'm going to go into this partisan environment and really give everybody a fair hearing and try to represent everybody was his stance. And, he's very personable. It worked.
I think there's a little bit of resentment to Reiser that seemed a little bit too manipulated.
Definitely. I think, sure. He was, this was an election to replace Rodney Alexander, the incumbent, who resigned very suddenly in August. Go work for Bobby Jindal. Governor Jindal called an election. Qualifying was 2 weeks later. So there was really no time for anyone to get a candidacy together. Neil Reiser was ready. He started raising money. He started filing. He put up a website. Yeah. There was a real backlash against him, and I think the idea was that he was going to have a pretty clear field, but instead 14 candidates qualified. And I don't know that he ever really overcame that. And then when he started getting all the endorsements and really towing the party line, I think, on a lot of issues, I think there was a negative reaction to that.
So the end of this, the outcome of this election, what does it say about Republican Party politics now?
Well, one thing that I think is very interesting, and the Democrats find this very interesting, is maybe you don't have to be so focused on getting rid of the Affordable Care Act. Maybe politically you can say, look, I don't like it, but it's here. We should try to make it work. Let's acknowledge some of the good things it does. I mean, this is a very poor district, 25% poverty. Both candidates really said that they know people who've needed a safety net. It makes sense, I think.
So when is he going to be sworn in?
He's sworn in already.
Already, so we have a new congressman.
We have a new congressman.
And the other thing is that he may be a great guy. I don't know, but there was a little bit of the Mr. Smith goes to Washington syndrome here about this idea. Well, I've never been to Washington.
Right.
That's not a plus, okay?
That might make it very
challenging.
Because there's 434 other people you're working with who have been in Washington most of their career, and they play tough,
I mean, he's not a rube. He's been around the world. Yeah. He's been in the military. He's built a very big business. He just kind of has not made it to Washington.
But he's new to Washington.
But he's very new to Washington, and one of the things he said is, I generally trust people, and maybe I need to start figuring out who I can trust.
Well, he's in Washington.
I would say
now.
yes.
He's going to have to learn how to do that quickly.
Yeah, he needs to watch the documentary about Joe Cow.
Yes.
Let's go over to Dawn now and our dark streets and our Future Watch segment.
Well, it feels very dark in certain parts of our streets, and it is very dark in certain parts. The city says part of that is our tree canopy. The big, old, mature trees make it challenging for the lights to be on and bright. Part of it is the streetcar construction project that we talked about on this show a couple weeks ago, where they're putting in new ties and new conduit. There is no power for the street lights. So the city has put some temporary lighting up in several places along St. Charles Avenue, and they'll look at it again as we get closer to Mardi Gras. But it is dark in some sections along St. Charles Avenue, and it's going to remain dark until that streetcar project wraps up in 2014. One other area of the city that we've talked about is South Claiborne Avenue, where 4 pedestrians, according to city records, have been killed, and some of them claim that it's because the streets are so dark that they have been hit on that. That project is finished. They're going through the final walkthroughs and the punch list items. The lights are back on. It is much brighter in that area. And some of the capital projects, like that one, they're changing out the lights to energy-efficient lights with LED bulbs that provide a better contrast in colors and a whiter, brighter light. 1/3 of the city's 51,000-ish. It's a moving number because as projects and neighborhoods expand, there are new lights, but there are 51,000 roughly lights that the city's responsible for, and 1/3 of them have been changed out to be these new energy-efficient LED lights. Their bulbs last 7 to 10 years versus 2 to 3 for the other kind of bulbs. if you want to look at the city like you would look at your own house and a light going out, on any given day, 40 of those 51,000 lights go out. And another one is hit by a driver and knocked down. So it's a constant battle, the city says, to keep up and keep the lights lit. They had about 6,000 out as of January. Now it's about 3,200 out. There are no more on the record that they're aware of that are Katrina outages anymore. This is just regular maintenance now.
It's catching up from the hole that they were in.
Right. They're definitely digging out of a deep, deep hole that Katrina left. They say, please, please, please use the city's 311 number to report outages. That is how they set up their daily track of where they're fixing lights, by the calls to 311.
Where are they finding the most outages?
Actually,
what neighborhoods are most
they
in the
say
dark?
it is widely scattered. There isn't a concentrated area anymore where there are outages. One area where they really do have problems, and the city is responsible for the lights on the interstate highways and the state highways, especially I-10 in the east by the Michoud exit. They've had repeated cases of theft, people getting into the boxes and stealing the copper wires. And they'll go back out to the same light 3 and 4 times and have the things within that light fixture stolen over and over. So, you know, they have people hit the lights and knock them down, people steal from the lights, the light bulbs just go out. It's a rough job.
ending.
It's never ending.
There are
They're
stretches-
never all going to be
There are
on.
stretches of St. Charles Avenue,
Where it's very dark.
which is a very popular avenue. A lot of people jog, a lot of people walk along there, and there are stretches that are just pitch dark almost.
Part of that is that RTA project where the lights are out, where the streetcar work is being done. Part of it is just the canopy of trees and figuring out how to reposition the lights. They're constantly looking.
But brighter times ahead. you would say?
Brighter times ahead
Okay.
with LED lights kind of all
Definitely
over.
a little bit brighter.
Eventually, that is the plan for the whole city.
All right, Don, thanks a lot. Errol, it's 50 years ago on a Friday that John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas.
Yeah.
And those of us who were alive at that time remember that moment, remember where we were.
Well, probably most of us were in school that day because it was a
Yeah.
school day, and the word about his dying came out like around 1 o'clock. So most people were probably in recess or at lunch, and so at least if they were in the central time zone. But you know, it's just fascinating to think back about the whole chain reaction of history as I was thinking about like state politics. 50 years ago, there was a gubernatorial election going on in Louisiana. The primary was going to be in December, so a few weeks down the line. One of the leaders was a guy named Robert Kinnan, K-E-N-N-O-N, who was a former governor, who was running on a very strong anti-John Kennedy platform because civil rights was an issue and people were talking about states' rights. And Kinnan was a front runner. I mean, he had a good chance of being elected governor. Well, all of a sudden, after November 22nd, his campaign just bottomed out. So from the back reaches of the race came this guy, a little-known public service commissioner from North Louisiana named John McKithen. And the people, and one of the other candidates was Joseph Morrison, mayor of New Orleans. Well, the people from the rest of the state who didn't like New Orleans, which was pretty much the rest of the state, wanted somebody as an alternative to Kinnan. So from out of nowhere, John McKithen got into the runoff, and then he was elected. Now, there was nothing very promising about McKithen. He was talking the same sort of racist talk that everybody else was. It turns out he became a major figure as governor of Louisiana, and he was really the guy who really integrated state government, was very supportive of civil rights. He was so popular after his first term that they changed the law to allow governors to succeed themselves. Apart that they didn't trust governors enough that they could only serve just 1 4-year term. But it was also McKithen who, working with Morrison, championed the Superdome. And it took a governor from North, this is like Nixon going to China, okay? It took someone from the other side philosophically. It took an anti-New Orleans governor from North Louisiana to sell the Superdome to the rest of the state. And even to this day, you go to the Superdome, there's a statue of John McKithen.
Indeed.
It is conceivable, I don't know how to deal with this emotionally and intellectually, but had it not been for the assassination, we wouldn't have a Super Bowl or a Superdome or the Saints or anything else that followed, because McKithen was the pivotal person. But also, 50 years ago, Lyndon Johnson became president of the United States. Lyndon Johnson was a much better legislator than John Kennedy was. He knew how to pull the levers, and it was Lyndon Johnson's job to take over the pending civil rights legislation. And the combination of his ability plus what was now the sympathy factor for Kennedy got civil rights passed in '64, also the Voting Rights Act in '67, and that had a dramatic change in politics, because politics before then, it was still the old Civil War alignment. Most people in the South were Democrats, but they were either conservative Democrats or liberal Democrats, and most of them were conservative Democrats, okay? Well, after that, and then there were only a handful of Republicans. With the passage of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, you start to see black voters almost unanimously joining the Democratic Party, and the Republican Party becoming sort of like the white conservative party. So you saw that realignment, and it all traced back to it. But also with the passage of the Civil Rights Act, you saw programs like Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, the Total Community Action, which created in poor urban neighborhoods, it was supposed to be like an empowerment thing where there was neighborhood money, and it was very controversial, and especially in black neighborhoods where people got money and they could do political action. A lot of political leaders came out of that movement. And then also there were more blacks on the voting rolls. So what happens is in New Orleans by 1969, when there's a mayor's election in New Orleans, and you have somebody like Moon Landrieu who's running for mayor, and he's elected. He was the first mayor elected by the black vote in New Orleans, who had the black majority. But it was also the election where black politics changed from being the old minister-dominated election, where you go and talk to the ministers, to where you had these new non-religious affiliated groups like Soul and Bowl and Coup and all of that. All of those were created by the whole combination of total community action and the new migration to the urban areas created by the Civil Rights Bill and all that. So all that was really part of the whole impact of the stemming from the assassination. I mean, it was really a pivotal moment in American history.
In American history and in American politics. It's great observations.
Yeah.
Thanks, Errol.
And then you can go on, I got to go, but it was also the beginning of modern tourism in New Orleans, because chain hotels stayed out of the South prior to the passage of civil rights. After civil rights, you got Sheraton and Hilton and all of those things coming in. Then all of a sudden they're financing a convention center and all that. So everything else, and so it just starts a whole spiral. Now, how would things have been differently had there not been the assassination? I don't know, but it certainly had its impact.
Thanks a lot, Errol.
Okay.
Now, quality of life.
Yes.
We're going to get to it now. There was a poll done by UNO, Survey Research Center, is it? And some winners, some losers in this poll.
Right. Start with the winners.
Okay.
A number of winners in Jefferson Parish, actually. Sheriff Newell Norman remains extraordinarily popular. 82% approval rating. John Young, Parish President, 70%. The Parish Council, 72%. More mixed in New Orleans. It's interesting. Mayor Landrieu, 65%. He's in great shape going into his reelection, which is coming up in just a few months.
Yep.
The City Council, not so much. The City Council, 47%. That was an interesting number. And there was actually a large racial split among that, much more popular among white voters than black voters. So that's not a number you necessarily want going into election. They're all up too in February. And, we may see some kind of interesting racial politics, I think, in those elections. Marlon Gusman, some very bad news, I would say. Sheriff Gusman has been the subject of just horrible news reports and court findings and all of that.
And what was the racial divide on that?
Give me a minute to find it. Okay. He's at 33% overall. Which is interesting because, of course, crime is the biggest issue in New Orleans. It remains, always has been, or it has been for a long time, and of course remains that way. Police Chief Surpass has 54% approval rating. District Attorney Leon Canizero, 55%. So, not a little less blame on them. The criminal court's 34%. So maybe more blame on the judges than on the people on the other side than on the
which is interesting in a sense, because if Gusman gets worse grades and if it's related to crime, he actually has less impact on actual day-to-day crime fighting than.
And that could also just be the conditions in the jail, because there's been so much publicity.
Absolutely, he does get that. Yeah.
And also not just the conditions, but the financial problems.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
But what is the feeling of the public about crime issues? Do they see crime decreasing, or do they feel it is not decreasing? Do they feel safe at their homes at night?
a little bit more than they used to, but still the numbers are not nearly where they need to be. You know, for example, 38% say they sometimes hear gunshots at night. This is in Orleans Parish.
There was a big divide on that between white respondents and black
of
respondents,
course,
wasn't there?
which would make sense given the neighborhoods where we have a lot of crimes. So, and then actually there was a separate poll from conducted by the Southern Media Opinion Research Center about statewide politics. So we have some numbers on some of our statewide politicians too that are interesting. Governor Jindal still unpopular. He's up to 42%, which is a little better than he was in the spring.
He was down in the 30s for a little while.
But that's still not great.
Yeah.
David Vitter actually pretty popular at 58%. Some of the other potential gubernatorial candidates, Jay Darden over 60, John Kennedy over 60. Mary Landrieu got some interesting news in this poll and some bad news, but expected, I think, and that's that her approval rating has dropped 10 points since the last poll last spring. She's at 46%, and that has to be the Affordable Care Act.
Obamacare, yeah.
And the fact that she was a key vote for it, that she, like the
You
president.
see her distancing herself from it right now.
One of the things that's so interesting is my inbox has been full all week with emails from Mary Landrieu about flood insurance. That's what she wants to talk about, and that's, you know, getting rid of some of the rate increases that are coming, because that's an important issue, a very important issue to the state.
Absolutely.
But it's also a bipartisan issue.
Okay. Thanks a
Yes.
lot, Stephanie.
Sure.
Good information there. Okay, let's take a look at what's going to be coming up in the future.
Well, yesterday the city council and the mayor passed the city budget. They were all hugging each other and all in agreement with us. And among the many items in it is more funding for, there's going to be 3 new police classes during the next year, or the next couple of years, training about 130 police officers. Also, the capital budget has room for like 100 extra police cars to be purchased. So an upgrade in police department.
Great. Manuel?
Well, I think actually I'm going to take out of my regular wheelhouse and say that the Saints in the next few weeks are going to be crucial for them. I mean, you have Seattle, then followed by quickly a couple of games against Carolina that are going to define where we end up in the playoffs, what position we might be able to jockey for. So I think that's what I'm going to be looking forward to.
Send positive thoughts all the way. Dawn?
Well, everybody's getting ready to deck the halls and light up, and for the first time, or light their Christmas lights up, for the first time since ever. Convention Center Boulevard and the Downtown Development District are lighting that section of New Orleans up. Between Julia Street and Poydras, the lights go on Saturday.
Holiday season here. Stephanie?
As if we didn't have enough lawsuits going on over coastal restoration, it looks like we may be getting one more. The state, which has been very critical of the levee authorities' lawsuits against the oil companies, is looking at maybe suing the Army Corps of Engineers for some of the same damage.
All right. Thanks so much for being here this evening with us. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week on Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
Lightning